Hello, everyone out there. I am Bob Plankers, and I am a staff technical marketing architect at VMware. And as part of our series on for Cybersecurity Awareness Month this year, here every October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it is terrific. And we really thank the folks at CISA, the U.S. Government agency. CISA organizes it, and really thank them. They do some great work in the public sector that also spills over into the private sector. So last week we've been doing a few of these. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm Bob Plankers. See, some of you are joining me, and welcome. Here, we'll get into it. I always have disclaimers. This one, if we do happen to traipse into futures for some reason, I don't really plan on it, but it's the VMworld disclaimer as usual. I'm so cool, I get two disclaimers, and the second disclaimer is, hey, context matters basically in security. It's really important. Some guy on the internet telling you to do something, is that a good idea or not? It's up to you. For compliance, you should check and see what your auditor thinks. You should check and see what your security folks think. Is it a good idea? Might not be. Things that are good ideas for some people might not be good ideas for others. And so that's really important. So, I mentioned Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, CISA. They've got a lot of resources out on their website, CISA.gov, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And so that's kind of right up our alley, right? And so this is the third talk that we're doing, that I'm doing this month. Other parts of VMware are doing other talks as well, and we've got a lot of resources. Cybersecurity should happen all year long. It's not like a compliance audit where when the audit is done, it's done. We're doing security at all times, right? And so it's really important to continue to do this stuff. But the thing about security is that if you don't catch it now, maybe it's a good excuse. This month is a good excuse to create some new content and to drive some awareness, do some live streams. And if you've got questions, one, you should join us for our last two. Next week, we're talking about compliance. Compliance isn't security, and other lies we tell ourselves. Well, compliance isn't security, but they're very related to each other. And frankly, if it weren't for compliance, there's some organizations that wouldn't do any security. And so, that's not good. But we'll talk about it next week. You should join us. And then on Halloween, we'll talk about infrastructure hardening. We'll walk through the security configuration guide for vSphere 8. We'll go line by line. Well, maybe it won't be line by line, but we'll cover all the high points there. And will it be boring? Possibly. Will it be awesome? Possibly. We'll see. If you've got questions, you should put them out in the chat. I'm using a service called StreamYard to aggregate all this stuff. We're on YouTube, the VMware Cloud channel. We're on the vSphere channel on YouTube. We're also on LinkedIn and Twitter and who knows, all kinds of places. If I'm not seeing your chat, one, I'm sorry about that. Two, try coming over to the vSphere or the VMware Cloud channels chat and ask your question there. I'm talking about security bad ideas and ways to deal with that today, but I'll answer a lot of questions if you've got questions out there. So security bad security ideas and the people that love them. I was thinking about this last night and actually yesterday morning, and thinking about it, that I don't want to shame anybody, so there's going to be some ground rules. I've done some really stupid things in my life, both on computers and not on computers. And so I want to, and I've learned from them. And I'm hoping to build an environment where we can ask questions and learn from them as well. So a few ground rules. This is the symbol for ground and a ruler. Haha, Bob's funny. I do think I'm funny. If I'm not funny, I'm sorry, but I do like the odd dad joke and things. A few ground rules. I want to cover a few, do some level setting, as it were, whatever you want to call it. First, security is always a trade-off. When we're thinking about things and trying to figure out if they're a good idea or they're a bad idea, we need to think about what we're trading off. I often liken it to a slider back and forth. Are things that are, if we secure something, is it more complicated? Is it more complex? Is it more involved to manage? If things that are more usable, and usability is usually the trade-off there, I'm going to pick on it here. Things that are more usable, are they more simple? Are they more manageable? Are things that are secure higher cost or lower risk? And conversely, usability, those are unfounded assumptions, especially those last ones. That something that's secure is actually. Thank you, Brandon. Don't listen to this. Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You might have seen my Twitter comments a month and a half ago or something, where somebody was giving me crap about my humor. Don't worry, it doesn't bug me. But I appreciate the support. Thank you very much, and thanks for being here. The uh, so anyhow, higher costs are things that are secure more costly. Are they lower risk? Not necessarily. The trade-off isn't always straightforward. Think about air gaps. Air gaps are like the holy grail of or treated like they're the holy grail of security, but they're a complete pain. They're pain in the rear because they're hard to work in those environments. Those environments eventually have to touch something, right? And so how do you do that? You have to get patches in there. Usually those environments are subject to a lot of rules around patching frequently and patching in a timely fashion. And so it's hard to work in those environments. And so humans tend not to want to. And so, does that make for a more secure environment? Potentially not. You've got one big security control at air gap, and then hard. I've had it described to me as an M&M, hard candy, hard shell on the outside, soft gooey interior. You don't want that. You want hard shell all the way through, and that's the zero trust sort of thing. I've been trying not to talk about zero trust so much lately. I think it's kind of died out a little bit. Not that zero trust is a bad idea, but as a buzzword, having zero trust, the idea that zero trust really putting additional controls, hardening environments on the inside as well. And that's really important. So another thing, security always depends on context. If we're going to evaluate something as a bad idea, maybe it isn't a bad idea given the context. Maybe it's the best worst idea out there. I think you probably know what I mean. Sometimes it's, instead of good, better, best, it's bad, worse, and awful, and so, yeah, context is really important. And context is actually really important when you look at things like the vSphere security configuration guide. These are opinions, these are suggestions. Whose opinions? Sometimes mine. We've got a whole group at VMware that develops these and tests them, and that we do it in conjunction with the work that we do for disastigs and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they're opinions and suggestions. Do they include every security control that you could possibly set in vSphere? No. Because there's such a thing as too much security, right? Security is a trade-off. If you turn it up to 11, as the movie quote goes, you lose things. You lose the ability to manage things. You terrorize your staff, and so finding a balance there is really important. CIS benchmarks, what security scanners look for, the Tenable Nessuses and Rapid Sevens and all that stuff. Not to pick on them, they're great, but they're just implementing somebody's opinions and suggestions, sometimes their own, sometimes they pick it up from somewhere else. But it's really important, does their context match your context? Because these are implementation guides, and people use these like checklists, but it doesn't quite fit. So use your head, and context really matters. Speaking of that, and I kind of mentioned this, the implementation guides versus compliance regulations. I don't want to talk extensively about compliance, but compliance is always a negotiation. These security configuration guide or CIS benchmarks or whatever is a really cut and dried, like it's either true or it's false. And you get a score, and oh my goodness, we're all going to die if we don't get our score up to like whatever, and no, compliance kind of takes the opposite thing. Compliance always talks about what you need to get done, but it doesn't tell you how to do it, and that's really important. In fact, I've got a little thing, and more words than I care for sometimes, but compliance frameworks cover the guidelines and general principles, whereas these implementation guides are technical instructions for a very specific product. A compliance framework describes what you need to accomplish. You need to do multi-factor authentication. You need to patch once in a while. You need to remove vulnerabilities. It probably doesn't actually say you need to patch. You need to remove and mitigate vulnerabilities. Whereas an implementation guide will say you need to patch. Okay, those are kind of the same, but there's nuances there. Compliance frameworks never tell you how to do something in a product, and implementation guides very rarely tell you why they suggest something. That's actually something that we try to do in the security configuration guide, is explain what the rationale is there, so you can make a good decision about it. Compliance frameworks are ultimately negotiable. People don't think about it, but you can negotiate with your auditor. Password lengths and complexity, and that is a good example of it from my past. I did this stuff for 23 years out in the real world, and before I joined VMware 4 years ago. And one of the things that we ended up negotiating, there were just certain things about password it was password changes is what it was. Changing a password every 60 days, that's a pain in the duff. Could we lengthen that somehow? And the auditor's answer is yes. Compensating controls, and the idea of compensating controls is that if you can't meet one security control directly, maybe there's something you can do to compensate for that. So the compensating control for not wanting to change passwords every 60 days was, can we have more entropy, require longer, better passwords, that sort of thing. And so we stretched it to 180 days or something. They had a calculation for it, but it's negotiable. It really is. Implementation guides are not negotiable. It's pass or fail. It's very binary. It's, and that's that, and unfortunately you get a score from the scanners and stuff, and people use it. It's okay. Compliance frameworks talk about process and technology. It's a fair warning, I'm going to talk a lot about process and technology today as well, or process and people, but implementation guides, just technology. Compliance frameworks, hard to automate, really hard to automate. Implementation guides, that's why implementation guides exist, is to be able to automate this stuff, and people just want the easy button. And when it comes right down to it, compliance frameworks are what you're actually judged on by an auditor, whereas an implementation guide, sometimes auditors will use them, but it's, implementation guides, there's, again, somebody's opinion that someone is not necessarily an auditor or an expert or even subject to compliance stuff. And so, use your head. Another thing, no blame. If we're talking about stuff, I don't want to name and shame things. There's going to be stuff that I think are bad ideas that people just they have to do. I don't blame people. Their circumstances, the context, again, really matters. I do truly believe that humans learn through pain. Maybe this is grim or whatever, but I saw this the other day on Twitter, the 10,000 mistakes idea. The Codeless Code is an interesting website, and I saw this in particular. A novice asked what separates the monk from the master, and 10,000 mistakes. I feel like I've made 10,000 mistakes in my life so far on certain topics. And what's really interesting, what of the old monk who labors in the cubicle next to mine? Surely he has made 10,000 mistakes. Bonzen shook his head sadly. 10 mistakes, 1,000 times each. And I hope we all strive to make new mistakes at all times. So, the other thing too, I remember with humans are driven by pain and learn from pain. The idea of paying, this is actually 2008. I found it this morning and added it here. The idea of paying, you think about ransomware and how we learn. Ransomware has been very educational, unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, and that their security practices may need a little bit of improvement. And spending actually shows up as pain, registers as pain to a lot of humans. So I guess that's good. I don't know. Something interesting. Last of the things in my list here are, all of us lie to ourselves. Sysadmins lie to themselves. I did as a sysadmin. I do now even. I'll get to that this afternoon. No, I won't. I'll come back and fix it later is probably the most popular lie I've ever heard. I'll come back and I just want to get it running. I'll come back and do it right later. No, so you get it running with using the administrator login or a domain admin account or, something, and then you move on. you forget about it. Squirrel runs past and ooh, shiny object, whatever. And I'm a little ADHD anyhow, but some people I'm sure can actually keep track of that stuff, but we move on. Hey, it's working. It's out of sight, out of mind. So with that said, let's get into the meat of things here. Again, if you've got questions, things that you want to bring up or whatever, put them out in the chat. And again, if it doesn't look like I'm answering you, I'm usually pretty quick. I've got my monitor over here. If you see me looking over here, I'm checking the chat channel, and I really appreciate the questions. Thanks for showing up, folks, and it's good to talk to folks again here. If it doesn't seem like I'm answering you in a timely fashion, try the YouTube channel chats. They tend to be more reliable with the service that I'm using. So, and yeah, hello. I'm not going to say your name, Uranus, but I guess I did. Look at that. Anyhow, so I did want to warn you. I'd already warned you a little bit. I'm going to talk about people and process things here. I know we all got into computers because the computers aren't people, and people bother us and things. But the older I get, the more I realize that all security problems are really people problems at the core. And whoops, I guess, nice choice of career if I wanted to avoid people. But you've been warned. If you want to leave now, that's fine. I won't be offended if you subscribe to our YouTube channels first before you leave. Turn on the notifications. Not to be a YouTube star here or whatever, but ring the bell. At the very least, I would appreciate it if you signed up for our security advisory mailing list so that you are notified when there is a problem. I like to joke it's the most negative mailing list you'll ever be on. We only send you bad news, but it's stuff the attackers are going to learn too. So we want you to have the same information that the attackers do at the same time. There's no way to tell the good guys things without accidentally telling the bad guys things at the same time. And the scary thing is some of the really advanced bad guys already know about it. That's how we found out about it, and so better to just subscribe, be notified. Heck, Log4j is our VMSA about it is how a lot of our customers, I won't say most, but a lot of our customers found out about Log4j. They thought it was a problem with VMware software. Well, it was. We use Log4j in a lot of places, 45 different products or something. But and it was a problem with VMware software, but it was a bigger problem. In fact, we had to kind of backpedal and say, hey, well, isn't just a VMware problem. Look at everything in your environment too, And so, yeah, it's the other thing in the rest of this. Do a little role playing, do a little theatrical stuff, because as it turns out, most of the people that love the bad security ideas are our coworkers. Our non-technical coworkers and our bosses and things. They have ideas. They just want to get stuff done and move on. And yeah, so without further ado, mistake number one, not knowing why, often coupled with not asking why. Why is a very powerful question. It's why 5-year-olds ask it all the time. Why, and but not knowing why. I mean, we were talking about this as sort of the ground rules, finding out why we want to do things. So you think about it, somebody walks up to you and, hey, we need to apply the security configuration guide. We need to apply a CIS benchmark. We need to do whatever. And okay, is there a particular thing? Asking why without seeming confrontational by asking why, like, why do we need to do that? Well, is there a particular thing you're interested in? Why? Or what's the motivation behind this? What are we trying to do? That's often a question I ask. What are you trying to do here? What you're proposing, what you're asking about doesn't make sense, or isn't, what are you trying to get done here? And again, security is always a trade-off. Hey, boss, security is a trade-off. Let's take a look at the controls, see what they do, why we need to implement them, and then prioritize them too. Like not all of the controls are equal. Some you can spend a lot of time chasing down TLS cipher suites, for example, and not move the needle at all as far as security. I'm just saying. We'll talk about that a couple more times. Mistake number 2 from a security perspective, saying yes. And I know I'm being funny and but saying yes to things, like I often talk about isolation. We need to isolate our management interfaces for vCenter server better in general across the whole VMware customer base. You know, why can desktops get to management interfaces on storage arrays, on vCenter server, on network switches, that sort of thing? You know, that's just a recipe for trouble when those desktops get broken into because somebody clicked on a link, you know, and humans are going to they're going to do dumb things. Admins do dumb things. We click on things. In fact, though, you know, the older I get, you might not be able to see it. I've got bifocals now, lucky me. And, you know, as my phone gets farther and farther from my face, you know, some of those Unicode DNS URLs look more and more legitimate at distance, at range there. And so we click on stuff we probably shouldn't click on. And so, you know, but that isolation, you're going to run into somebody and hear about it from time to time that's going to want access. You know, can I pick on the VP of marketing, but, you know, CEOs, whatever, you know, can I have access to vCenter server? Can I have access to our cloud consoles? You know, what are you trying to do here? What are you looking for? You know, and, you know, telling them we practice least privilege around here, and you can blame compliance. Compliance terrorizes so many organizations. Use it as a scapegoat. You know, for our compliance processes, and that we need. Can you send me an email with the job duties in it? That you know that your job duties and how they what permissions you need, that sort of thing. We need to put that in our documentation and run that through our process. I bet you they never send you an email, and then you don't ever have to work on it again. You know, but yeah. Another thing, we saw this a lot during the pandemic, and actually Log4j, we discovered that a number of people in VMware Cloud on AWS, because it's just easier, they took their vCenter servers and they put any rules in for so that they could access vCenter server from anywhere. You know, and that's great. It makes working remotely really easy, and attackers love it too. You know, and so you know, practicing that defense in depth. You know, if we're going to role play a little bit, hey, you know, hey Bob, we need to open up the service or whatever. You know, the internet is a really dangerous place. You know, multi-factor authentication goes a long way. Defense in depth is really the key there. Don't, you know, having those multiple layers of security control. So if there is a vulnerability or somebody's got a bad password or whatever, there's something. Have you ever seen the Swiss cheese model? I should probably put the picture of it in here. The Swiss cheese model, the idea of different slices, but the holes don't line up. So, you know, nobody can get all the way through, even though each layer has got vulnerabilities in it. And that's a really interesting way to model that. And so, you know, finding a way to open this stuff up, you probably have a VPN, you probably have something, but you know, at the very least, don't put your management interfaces. Your infrastructure is so core to an operation. We've got to protect it more. Another example, you know, and getting into some of the technical bad ideas, you know, vendor X says we should install a plugin into the vSphere client. We should install a component. They've got this, you know, how many vendors out there have an appliance? We need to run this appliance. Well, aside from the question, you know, how do you patch the appliance? When's the last time you patched it? You know, containers are the same way. You look at the container registries, and the container registries, the last time some of those things were updated was like years ago. And you think, that of all the vulnerabilities that are still in them or whatever, you know, vendor says that you should install that stuff. You know, why are you tying systems together like that? You know, I've always believed in the idea of loose coupling, trying not to tie systems together tightly. The more tightly you couple systems together, the more they have to move in lockstep. You know, so you couple a backup system together, you with your vSphere environment, you couple your storage environment together tightly with vSphere or whatever. That's great. You probably get a single pane of glass, and a friend of mine always calls it the single glass of pain, because that's actually what what it turns out to be. You end up not being able to upgrade one thing without upgrading all of it, and the net effect is you don't upgrade anything. And because it's all tied together, and it's too much work, and too heavy of a lift, you know, and you just don't get it done. You don't have enough. There's not enough time in the day to do that stuff. Now, cut them apart, separate them, less friction for upgrades. You can secure them independently. Attackers love the integrated stuff. If they pop my Active Directory account and can log into vCenter server, hey, they're logged in as me. Now they have access to the backups. Now they have access to storage, all that stuff. Don't give them freebies. Don't give the bad guys an advantage, and lock it down. Build the walls between them and enforcement points, perimeter security, all kinds of stuff, and so just asking, is this plugin a requirement? Can we manage them separately, or is it really a requirement? Is it required for the product to function? More often than not, the answer is no. Just maybe a nicety from a UI perspective, that sort of thing, but not from a security perspective. Another common one, hey, we need to disable vMotion. No. And that leads me to mistake number 3. The saying no is, so saying yes to things. Yeah, sure, we can add you CIO, sure, we can add you to vCenter server. What could go wrong, is one direction. But saying no too much is dangerous too, from a security perspective. Having people hear you say no all the time, you're going to start getting ordered to do stuff, and you don't want to do that, and so disabling vMotion is a common one that I've heard both in the past and, my work at VMware. Disabling vMotion without a doubt is usually a vendor requirement, and it's vendor requirements, hey, this little web server needs 32 CPUs and a terabyte of RAM, and can't vMotion, needs to be pinned to a particular storage, needs to be backed by the world's fastest SSDs and all that stuff. Actually, they usually never say SSDs. It's usually like pinned to on a RAID 10 volume or whatever, which is a dead giveaway that the advice is really old. But vMotion, really important for patching. Dear application admin that's got a crazy vendor request, vMotion is really important. It helps us patch the environments that we're in, without having to take all the workloads down. That's actually something that most organizations don't understand outside of the sysadmin groups, is that vMotion exists. Your change managers, when you file a change to patch your vSphere clusters, may not realize you're not taking everything down. And that's a conversation you might want to have proactively with them. Hey, we're not impacting workloads here. We're just updating the infrastructure itself. Oh, okay. You're reducing risk, and that's what it comes down to. Disabling vMotion, you can probably find a solution for it, but it comes down to trying to say no without actually saying no. These are, I guess, I forgot my icons in these circles here. Sorry, but making them ask for things in writing. And sometimes even ask for it in writing and get your boss to approve it. That usually got rid of 90% of the extraneous requests there. That security things that people wanted to do, but weren't good ideas. Opening up firewall rules, access to things, more access you give to things in your organization, especially infrastructure, the more risk you have. And so really curtailing that is important. It comes down to business risk. If you learn how to talk about it in terms of business risk, the business will listen, and I know we don't want to say things with business speak or whatever, that feels wrong in a lot of ways. But, communicating to businesses in terms they understand: money, risk, what you're planning on doing is really risky here, or opens us up to liability, opens us up to attacks, all kinds of stuff. Positioning in terms of increased risk is really important. People listen to that, and CISOs actually they speak this language. They understand risk. They don't want to be in the front page. The CISO is a marked person to start with. Their lifespan is usually not that long, because they become the scapegoat for all of the dumb decisions that the whole organization makes that are outside of their control in a lot of cases. And so if you can play to that, use it to your advantage. Another tactic that I always used was don't say no. Actually say yes. We can definitely do that. We can totally build your cluster without vMotion, all that stuff. We're going to have to hire 5 people. It's going to cost you $1 trillion a year. and we're gonna have to host it on the moon, all of this stuff. And but with all of this stuff, be prepared. They might actually say yes if you give them a ridiculous quote. And I've done that in the past. Give them a ridiculous quote, they might turn around and go, "Oh, okay," So make it accurate at least. From the vMotion perspective, this was me, dealing with vendor requests and that. Yeah, I know your application. Your vendor said that you need no firewall rules. That's one of my favorite. No firewall rules. Don't firewall it at all, because it's a performance thing. I know you can't use vMotion. I know you can't use DRS or any of that sort of stuff. I know they say that, but why don't we leave that stuff on and see if the apocalypse really happens? If it does, if there's a problem, we'll, not to sound like Vanilla Ice, but if there's a problem, we'll solve it. And but more often than not, there's not a problem, and it's the vendor not wanting a bad experience. It's liability for them. Hey, you didn't follow our rules and you had a bad experience. Not on us. So it's a negotiation. Clearly I'm a crazy person. Anyhow, number 4, speaking of DRS and things, security mistakes. I absolutely think vMotion, DRS, high availability, vSphere HA, the restarting of VMs on other hosts if a host crashes, native key provider, enhanced vMotion compatibility. People don't turn EVC on. And they don't turn it on because they forget about it when they build a cluster, and then it's hard to turn on after the fact. It's gotten easier to turn on, and people are also, if you're not familiar with it, EVC smooths out the differences between the CPU families. So if I got my Skylake, let's say I've got a cluster of Skylake servers, and now it's full, and I need to add to it. I don't want to buy old Skylake hardware anymore, right? I want to buy Ice Lake or some of the new hotness. But then I can't vMotion back and forth. So do I build a new cluster with just Ice Lake? That might be an option. Or if I have EVC turned on, it masks out. So you tell EVC what microcode level you want to run at, Skylake or whatever, and then it'll actually mask out the Ice Lake instructions that are the things that are specific to Ice Lake, so that things can move, your workloads can move back and forth seamlessly. And we hear comments like, "Oh, doesn't that impact performance?" Most enterprise software doesn't care about those extra instructions. And if you do run into software that does, you can use per VM EVC to actually customize the level of instructions, of CPU instructions that are available to that workload. So problem solved. If you're building a new cluster, turn it on. If you have a power outage, turn it on quick, that sort of thing, before you turn everything else, all the workloads back on. Native key provider enables got added in vSphere 7 Update 2, and so enables a lot of the encryption stuff natively inside of vSphere. You don't need an external key management system in order to do that. DRS, vMotion, been around. vMotion's been around since 2005. Really makes me feel old. In fact, I remember sitting with a coworker setting it up on like vSphere 2 or whatever it was back in the day, and setting it up. We were just laughing when it worked. We're like, holy crap, this worked. Game changer, right? vMotion under vSphere 7 and again under vSphere 8 has been rewritten and really substantially improved. So that's those stun times and things that DBAs didn't like, whatnot. A lot of that stuff's improved. So think about that too. I mentioned DV switch traffic filtering. There's a way to add filters, basically low grade firewall rules. They're not really a firewall, but more like ACLs, to port groups in a distributed virtual switch. And it applies to everything in the port group. So if you want to customize it, also tip and trick, another neat tip, you can have 2 port groups. Let's say you're using VLAN tagging. You can have 2 port groups with the same VLAN configured on them, or configured identically. You got to have a different name for them, obviously, but then you can have different firewall rules or ACLs in there too. Inexpensive way, built right in. Clearly microsegmentation, all the NSX stuff is the gold standard when it comes to protecting workloads and things. But not all environments can build that stuff in due to dependencies or budget or any of that stuff. So think about that as an option too. The Mike. Hey, Mike. Good to see you here. Mike Foley is in the chat. You always remember your first vMotion, and that's absolutely true. That's funny he mentions that because because everyone's also sitting there pinging the VM that you're moving as well, and so it looked identical to I think what Kit did probably on a VMworld stage. So. Number 5, not having an inventory. How do you patch what you don't know about? How do you know that that thing that extra component out there it belongs to you and not to some attacker? I actually found this the other day, and I have no idea who the original poster is, and I'm sorry, and I want to give people credit for it, but it was too good to pass up in this presentation here. That unpatched machine that you forgot about that's not in an inventory somewhere, or maybe you don't have an inventory, that's a problem, because those are places that attackers can hide. They can establish persistence, to use the terminology, the infosec terminology. Establish persistence just means they have a base of operations. They live off the land, as it were. That's another infosec ism, living off the land. And so you'll see organizations try to deny them tools like PowerShell and all that stuff. Often those organizations end up hurting their sysadmins more than they end up hurting the attackers. But frankly, a good example of that as well. PowerShell is a good one. Hey, we can't install PowerShell. We can't install PowerShell because security. Well, Power CLI is a very powerful way a very easy way to make to do a lot of work in a vSphere environment, and so definitely recommended there. Don't hurt your sysadmins. Reverse DNS, PTR records in DNS, that's another common one. InfoSec people maybe don't want to have reverse DNS because it leaks information. That's our argument. It leaks information to the attackers. It tells the attackers what's on a host, perhaps. Attackers can figure it out. Believe me, they can figure it out on their own. It's the sysadmins. You gotta worry about the sysadmins. Like if I as a sysadmin can't figure out what's on a host, that's potentially a problem. That's an availability problem. And CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Really important to address all three of them. Plus, vSphere requires reverse DNS. It's just a requirement. Don't argue with it. Live it, love it, learn it. Anyhow. There's a reason not CIS benchmarks, and don't get me wrong. The talks, me commenting about CIS before, I think CIS benchmarks are great. The ESXi one, I'm going to reach out to them and see if we can work together on the next version of it, and that sort of thing. They do great work for the community, but again, it's opinions. They also have an opinion that this used to be the SANS top 20, and I think SANS turned it over to CIS. It's now the CIS top 18. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue the same, but there's a reason the first two controls are inventories, inventory and control of enterprise assets, inventory and control of software assets. There's a real reason there. How do you patch? How do you make sure that you've got everything patched, got everything secure if you don't know what you have in total? I always posit that Excel is the greatest database on the planet and the greatest sysadmin tool on the planet. You don't have to start. You don't have to start big. There's also hosted solutions. Snipe It has got great asset management and CMDB tools that are very accessible and very affordable. You don't have to go big or whatever. You just look around for stuff like that, and an Excel worksheet sitting somewhere. Works too, and it's something you can start right now. You don't have to have your boss's approval to do it, all that stuff. And you can just keep adding to it. Eventually somebody will find it and love it, and then it's official. So sixth thing, people in process, no professional self-care. And I'm not talking about, taking vacations or any of that stuff. What you do on your own time for taking care of yourself. I urge you to take good care of yourself and your mental and physical health and things. I'm talking about at work, though, and things like maintenance windows. I guess this is actually window maintenance, but you get my point. The maintenance windows, daytime maintenance windows. I've always hated the idea that people have to do maintenance windows in the middle of the night. There was a study a while ago now that showed something like 80% of IT outages were caused by human error. If you're patching in the middle of the night, that's, people are tired and they're error prone. Why? Why? Especially if you have vMotion and DRS and all that stuff, you should be able to do this relatively seamlessly. And I know from my previous life, there's some pushback once in a while, and you get applications that notice a little bit, but it's successful, and you can do it. And that change freezes, along with your daytime maintenance windows. And so, actually, with daytime maintenance windows, the last thing that I want to mention there, if you can't patch during the day, how are you going to survive a real outage? What's a real outage going to look like if you can't update a system during the day? And sure, sometimes you don't have availability built into all of your systems and things like that because it's a budget trade-off or whatever. But if you can't patch them ever, that's a real problem too. And I know patching is thankless. It's absolutely thankless work. At the best, it gets you right back to where you were, and it doesn't look like you did anything. At the worst, something goes wrong, and so it's not fun, but it's got to be done. It's the only way to get rid of vulnerabilities. Change freezes, so you declare a maintenance window. You declare a recurring maintenance window, and that's super helpful. And then use it, use it for regular updates. Talk to your change managers. If you've got an organization big enough to do ITIL sorts of things and have change managers and whatnot, ask them, hey, we want a regular maintenance window if you don't have one, and that's a conversation they're probably completely willing to have and would like to have it with you. Ask for change freezes. Hey, when we're doing this work, we don't want anybody else to do other work, and that's another conversation your change managers can help with, because dependencies and things, in my previous life, we had storage admins doing things at the same time we were doing an upgrade. I think, I can't remember I think it was to vSphere 6.5. We were upgrading to 6.5, and there was a storage upgrade going on at the same time. We had asked for a change freeze, and for whatever reason, both got approved. And they ended up being a circular dependency for obvious reasons. We used that storage array that they were upgrading. And what did not turn out well, I'll just put it that way. Ask for change freezes. And then standards. Have your own standards. Professional self-care involves having standards and living up to them, and not changing the standard just because some vendor comes along and asks and says, hey, you can't use vMotion. Write them down, publish them, put them on your internal wiki or SharePoint or whatever you use, that sort of thing. But, this doesn't seem like security stuff, but it is absolutely security stuff because it paves the way to get the security stuff done faster and without arguments. And so, last thing on my list, not prioritizing. And specifically, we usually see this with, we need to fix, somebody scans your environment. And in fact, Mike being out in the stream here or whatever, one of the first things that he and I ever worked on at VMware was one of the first things he told me is people show up with these scan results and just fix it, like turn it green, and okay, I have questions. So you've got your scan environment or your scan. Somebody did a Nessus scan, not to pick on Nessus, whatever. Rapid7, Joe Bob's Scanner Software X, whatever, but other tools too, even VROPS and Runecast and all of those tools that have implementation. They've got an implementation guide coded into them, and they're assessing your environment. So somebody shows up with that list. Okay, which one of these is most important? Well, what do you mean? No, which one is most important? You showed up with a list. Which should I work on first? What's more important to security? Is what you're prioritizing here important to security, or is it important to compliance? Which ones here? On that list, there's going to be some things that if you don't change them, attackers can use those things to advance their cause. There's going to be things on those lists are just nice to have. And unfortunately, some of the things scanners check for too, VM advanced hardening parameters and things like that. There's going to be a bunch of those that they look for, and we're going to work on in next year. One of my goals is by the end of the year to have all those scanners and all that have a real trimmed down list of what it's checking for for VM hardening, because a lot of that stuff was applicable to GSX, VMware GSX back in the day, or Workstation. Doesn't even apply to vSphere. And so why are these scanners checking for it? And so sorting through this, asking for prioritization, and especially with audits. Sometimes the audit is over and it's just a list of findings that you should fix for the next one. Somebody already accepted the risk. Well, if that's the case, maybe you've got time to, maybe you don't need to do the compliance related things. You should focus on the security things first. That's all I've got for you. Am I a crazy person with a watermelon on his head? Absolutely. I often say I put my pants on the same way everyone else does, over my head. And should you listen to anything I say? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But again, context is always important. Security is always a trade-off. Compliance is always a negotiation. And all the rest of it, that's a negotiation too. So wrap it up with some resources. We've got the security configuration guides, as always, the baseline hardening guidance for vSphere and derivative products as well. But for vSphere here, core.vmware.com is where all of that stuff lives. core.vmware.com/security. There's also a /compliance. There's also a /ransomware if you want. We've got some great stuff out there about ransomware resilience and things like that. Good ideas. A lot of what I just talked about too. The people and process side of things. And again, if you do nothing, if you don't listen to me at all, and I'm not suggesting that you should listen to me at all, except for signing up for the security advisory mailing list. Go sign up for it. Sign up for all of your vendors' security advisory mailing list. In fact, I should just put that as point 8 in the whole thing. Mistakes people make, not signing up for your vendor's security advisory mailing list. Join me again next week. I think next Wednesday is the 26th. Yeah, 7 days from now. 10 a.m. Pacific. We're going to talk about compliance and how we get compliance done, how we talk to auditors, how we talk about to auditors, not about auditors behind their backs. But auditors are our friends. They're just different. And so we can learn some things about them, some tips and tricks there. And then on Halloween here in the US, we're going to talk about infrastructure hardening. We'll walk through the security configuration guide. We'll go line by line. And like I said before, is it going to be boring? Possibly. Is it going to be awesome? Possibly. I don't know. We'll check it out. Hey, there's a non-security question out here. You're welcome for the sharing. I appreciate you folks showing up in the channel here. A non-security question. Took a V7 vSphere training course, and I was planning to take the VCP exam. With the release of version 8, do you know when the V7 exam will be deprecated? I do not. Absolutely do not. You should ask your sales team if you can, or the education. It usually takes a little bit. I don't know if anybody else in the chat knows this or whatever, but it usually takes a while because V8's so fresh. They're going to need to develop and update the content for it. So that takes a little while. I bet you've got some time, Yeah, try the VCP. I failed the VCP the first time. I got into the rat's nest of iSCSI questions, and I'd never done iSCSI before. And so, thanks a lot, and so, I went back and took it again, and no problem. I suck at taking tests, so I was really nervous the first time. You'll do great, and thanks for pursuing the VCP. Other questions? I'll stick around for a minute or two here, and otherwise we can wrap it up. But again, I thank you all, and I appreciate you all. And I hope you're staying secure.